Hey y'all, today we have a Penn Battle II 8000 that we're going to break down, service, reassemble, show you how to do all those things. Not a whole lot wrong with this reel, just it feels a little sluggish when you crank it, just probably some old grease inside, and the line roller feels a little sluggish as well. But besides that, I don't really feel anything else going on with the reel. Doesn't mean there's not something else inside there, it just doesn't feel that way to me. Alright, so we're going to start by taking the handle off, just by unscrewing it. And since I'm here, I'm going to just work on this really quickly. It might be a little frozen what it looks like, or stuck somewhere, but I can see a lot of old grease on there, so yeah, not that bad. Just gonna take a toothbrush and clean this out a little bit. Then we'll take some compressed air and just kind of blow that around a little bit. If there's anything residual, you can use a Q-tip and get inside there, just to get those remnants of old stuff out of there. And I'm gonna take my wire brush and just kind of clean the grooves out of the threads here. So basically all I'm going to do is take some oil, stick some right there, stick this inside that hole right there, and just kind of work it in. Just wipe the rest off. Now for this, we're just going to add some grease to it. And some here as well. Now we can just clean out the residual and then set it to the side. Alright, so first I'm going to hit that spool up by unscrewing this knob. Should just come right off. It's not coming right off. And that's probably just indicative of not being serviced and just kind of left there to sit in its own and wallow in its own juices and get frozen. So what we can do is, I'm going to crank this down to the bottom of the oscillation. I'm going to open this up by undoing 4 screws I think are under there. First I'm going to take this one off. Then we have 4 screws to remove to get that side cover off. I'm going to be a little bit careful with this stuff here, because if the spool is frozen, then something else could be as well. So and all these screws are going to be the same size except for the one that was on that rub guard on the bottom there. When you do take these off, just be wary or note that there's some washers under these screws. Kind of want to keep them intact. I don't care if they're there or not, honestly. I don't think they do a whole lot of good. But they're designed to help keep the water out. Alright, so I'm going to pull this off, open this, remove the screws for that crosswind block there. Then pull that spool out, and I'll show you what I'm going to do with it. Alright, Alright, so just pull that straight up. Now I'm going to take my rubber mallet here. I'm going to bang on this thing. I'm going to try it here first, but it may not work. So if it doesn't, essentially what I'm doing here is I'm just going to bang, turn it, bang, that sort of stuff. Yeah, I'm going to do it off the desk. Alright, so we got it off. And I much prefer doing it this way, banging from the bottom side, because there's a lot less chance of damaging something. I don't want to say that's not necessarily true, but if it's difficult to remove from this side, you can certainly turn it over and just bang lightly on top of the shaft. Just be careful you don't smush that together and then make it impossible or difficult for that knob to get on there. So that takes a more delicate touch from the top versus the bottom side. That's all I'm trying to say. Anyhow, you can see there's a little bit of rust inside there. You can see it on top of the bearing as well. So I'm suspecting we're going to have to remove this. I'm sorry, replace this and clean this stuff up. So we're going to start with the shaft first and break this stuff down. If you notice, there's a clip just above the bearing we need to remove. And the way you can do that is use some protection here. Just grip it like that. And I use my tweezers and just kind of push. I lock it into both sides of that ring and then just kind of push it backwards. When that happens, normally it can just come all the way off or come off partially like that. I'm going to protect it with this index finger right here and then just pry the rest of it off with a screwdriver, if I can find it. Like so. Now you should be able to pull this bearing up with any luck. There it goes. And you can take that thrust washer off. And that's it. I'm going to pause the camera, clean this stuff up. I'm going to use, in all likelihood, this wire brush, maybe some 4/0 steel wool, and some Corrosion X with some tissue and Q-tips. Just clean this stuff up. I'm also going to clean those grooves out on this, on the threads here. Alright, now we got this cleaned up. We're just going to jump to the spool, check the drag washers out, see how they look. We're going to take a small flathead screwdriver, stick it in between the gap between the spool and the retaining clip. Push in and up while you keep your finger over it. Just kind of work your way around it until it comes out, just like that. These should just pop up, but who knows at this point. They may not. And they are not. No, they're not for real. Shoot. Holy moly. Alright, they look like they have to be replaced. I got one more to go. Alright, I'll just work on getting that out. I do want to show you something here. There's also, like I showed you before, some rust inside here or some corrosion inside there. I'm just going to use my small screwdriver and just kind of scrape off anything that's kind of riding above the surface of that spool, just so it's easier for the shaft to go back in when we put it back in. I'm also going to clean this up and then come back to you guys with this stuff removed and show you how to put the stuff back in and what the stack looks like. Alright, so the drag had to be replaced, the bearing had to be replaced. We're going to start with the spool to get that stuff in, or to get the drags in, but before we do that, we're going to add some oil to this bearing here. Let this kind of seep in there for a sec. And to do the drags, we're going to add some drag grease to it, which would be this Cal's drag grease. I'm going to grease all of them first, then we'll put them all in kind of one shot. And this is just a light coat. You're not putting a whole bunch on here. Just kind of want to coat it with a thin layer. So the first thing that's going to go in is one of these drag washers. You see they need to fit in those slots that are in there. Then you have one metal keyed washer going in. Then you kind of just follow the same pattern as you go. Now the final step is to put this clip back in. You're going to take one end, kind of angle it down, look for the slot that it should be in. It's just above those drag washers. Then you can start one end and use your thumb or finger to work the rest of it around to get in those slots. One thing you do want to note is when you get to the end of it, make sure you double check it to ensure that it's in the slot that it should be, which this is. For the clicker, I did add some oil to here and kind of work that in just to make sure it's working fine. I'm going to take some grease, add inside that hole right there where that bearing or that stack for the shaft is going to sit, to try to avoid it getting frozen in the future. So I do want to make sure I do a good job of coating all the area inside here. Alright, now for the shaft, we're going to grease lightly up here. Also on the bottom we'll do the same thing. And we can go ahead and put this bearing on there. I'm sorry, the washer first, the thrust washer. But before I do that, I'm going to kind of work that grease in, that oil that I put on top of it in. Just kind of make sure it gets inside there. Alright, drop that straight on. Make sure it sits just like that over the collar that's on there. Drop your bearing on top. And now to put this back on, you want to make sure the bearing is seated far enough down where this can just rest and slide back onto the channel that it came off of. So I'm going to rest it right there like that. And you can even push this with your finger. But you'll get to a point where, well, maybe you can. If you have fingernails, you can do it. If you don't, then you'll need to get a flathead screwdriver at some point when it gets to the edge of the bearing and push the rest on. That's on and secure. I'm just going to double check it to make sure. And that's good. Now we're in business again. While we're here, we can go ahead and grease here where it's going to sit inside the block. And also the threads on top where that drag knob is going to go. Alright, let's go ahead and work on the rotor now. We're going to undo that screw that's at the top there. That's the lock nut or lock screw for this washer that's protecting the rotor nut. Just unscrew that. You can do it with this on there, but I'm just going to pop it off so you can see it. And now we're going to use our adjustable wrench to go ahead and just loosen this off. And that was pretty loose. Counterclockwise to take it off. Just kind of rock as you pull up. Now we can pop this washer right there off. And now we're going to remove this entire assembly so you can see what it looks like. So you're going to see me loosen some screws first. And the first one I'm going to take off is this side, because there's nothing under here. So it's nice and easy. Keep these separate just in case. This can turn and pull off, like so. And now we can undo the line roller. I'll show you how that breaks down, then I'll show you the bill spring assembly. So I have a washer there. I'm going to call it a collar or a bushing. You can pull this off. You'll have a washer right there, a bushing that's inside the line roller, and another washer on the back side that's inside there. The one thing to note here is that the thinner we call this thinner. I don't know how you call this thing, but the thinner side goes towards the bail wire. The thicker edge or thicker side goes towards the bail arm. I need to find a better word for this thing. So I'm gonna sit it just like that. I'm gonna try to get this out. If not, I'm gonna leave it in there and get it afterwards. It does come out, but it does get stuck in there, so I'm gonna leave it alone. All right, so for the bail spring area, I'm gonna keep my finger over this. I'm gonna gently rock as I pull up. When I get to the edge, I'm gonna work it up, like up that way, and up as well. 2 ups. Now we can take this off and reveal all the pieces that are under there. The bail spring with an arm inside of it. Then you have the trip arm, and that's it. I'm gonna get all the stuff cleaned up, come back to you, show you how to put it back together. Okay, let's go ahead and do the line rollers portion of it first. Take a little bit of grease, wrap it inside there. Make sure you get around the post as well as well as the back side of it. Take our first washer, stick that on there. I'm gonna do a little bit of grease on the outside of this for when it interacts with the line roller. A little bit on the inside of that collar right there. Some inside here where that's going to rest. And some on this side. Make sure I get on this side, and I did not. That's good. Like so. And now we're going to stick the bushing on first. It goes on either way. Remember that thinner end is going to go facing like that. This collar we can stick over this that line roller washer there. Kind of rest it on top like that. Then we're going to take our screw, which is that one. I'm going to add some grease to this as well, as a matter of fact. Let's get this set back up. Drop it in the screw down. Now we're not going to screw it the entire way, but we are going to kind of secure it. So right about there would be good. Still has some play in it. Now let's go ahead and grease the rest of the stuff that we're going to grease here. First one would be this, and I'm doing this because this has a little bit of wear in it, and it's one of those things that kind of erodes over time. So let's give it some protection so we don't need to change it out. Don't need to do anything for the bail spring. I'm going to add some grease here, but I'm also going to add some oil in a sec, or when I'm putting things back together here. So it's just a double measure for that. A little bit around there. And on the rotor itself, we're going to add some grease right there, somewhere around the post. Somewhere that trip arm rides, kind of like that. Somewhere that bail spring rides. Same for up here and around the shaft or the post for the screw. I'm sticking some inside the hole as well because I want to help protect it from getting frozen inside there. Now we can also do here and underneath here. One last thing to do would be this one. And that should be good, I think. Alright, so now we're going to take this. I'm going to just do some residual grease on top of it like that. That long end is going to be facing down, just like so. Gonna take this arm, stick it inside there, rest it just like that. Leave it there for a second, because we're gonna work to put this cover on top of it to keep that down. You can go all the way down if you want. I kind of like to leave it up slightly, just so there's a little bit of play in that cover. And I'm gonna push this down to make sure it's underneath that trip arm. And now I'm gonna take my bail arm, look for that hole right there, because I'm gonna put that over the shaft or the post for that arm that goes inside the spring. Now I'm just going to push down and rock until we feel it set in place, which it just did. Now I'm going to hold down on top of that, screw this in place, now we can lock both of these up. And now we can also tighten that line roller screw. Alright, so now we're going to take this, stick it on sideways like this, and it just drops straight down. I'm going to add some oil like I said before. Let's kind of work that in there a little bit first, and now we can secure it. Let's make sure it works, which it does. You can see the trip arm is working properly. Let's take a little bit of grease on top of it, and we're good. Alright, now let's go ahead and take this apart. I'm going to take the main gear out, that block out of there. And then we're going to wipe this off and see a screw that's underneath there that we need to remove to get that crosswind gear out. I'm just going to kind of work that up like so to get it out. There's a collar inside there, and I'm going to leave that piece on there and kind of wipe all this stuff off or clean it out. Let's go ahead and take this bearing out of there. And let's take this one off the main gear as well. You'll have a couple of washers under there. I'll take those off and show you how to put those back on afterwards. Now all we have left is this stack up here. We're going to take this piece, kind of lift it up in the air. Hopefully this comes straight up, which it does. You'll see a little collar with a spring around it. The spring's going to be facing up. If you do happen to take this off, the one thing you want to note here is the spring, or the point of the spring, will be facing up towards this section right here, which is kind of like a little dip, a little bit thicker than the bottom portion of it. So when you put it back together, that's essentially how it's going to look. It will not look the other way because that'll be too short. Hope that made sense. Alright, so now we're going to take these 3 screws out so we can remove the pinion stack. Now we can just lift that cover off of there, and let's pull and pray. Hey, it came out. Nice. What you have here is just, come on. You have a bearing, you have your anti-reverse clutch right there. Then you have a bearing cup with another bearing inside of it. I think that's it. Oh no. We'll take this off and show you how that looks as well. Alright, so to remove this piece, we're going to take our small flathead screwdriver, stick it in the gap on the E-clip, and just kind of twist to remove it. All you simply do is pull straight up. It's a good thing we're removing this because it feels kind of tight. It shouldn't be that hard to come off. Pull straight up, just like that. Then you have a spring under there. And that is it. Alright, so get all this cleaned up as always, and I'll come back to you and show you how to put it back together. Woo! Look at that. All right, we're gonna do the upper section first. The first thing we're gonna do is this secondary dog. The way this is gonna sit is, let me put a little bit of grease around here first. It's gonna sit looking just like that. Hope you guys can see that. The little pronged end is sticking up. I'm just gonna drop it over just like this. And now we're gonna take our backup dog and it's gonna look like that when you put it back on. So looking like that. Take it anywhere you want to put it. Stick it on there. Get it to where that lines up, kind of like that. When you get to this edge, it's going to be blocked by this this piece right here. So we're going to lift it up slightly. Push it over and then down. Alright, so now I'm going to stick this E-clip back on there. Just going to kind of push it on like that. I'm going to use my screwdriver to get it on there because it's hard for me to get it on otherwise. Some people like pliers, I like screwdrivers. Yeah, that's looking better. There we go. Alright, so now we're going to take some grease inside here, kind of like lather that in there. One thing you don't want is that pinion stack to get frozen or stuck inside here, because it's difficult to get it out. Not impossible, but I did add some grease inside this hole right here. And now we're going to put this stack back together. I did replace the top or upper pinion bearing because that other one was bad. So we had a couple of bearings that were bad in this reel. I'm going to work this in. And now I'm going to add a little bit of oil, maybe like a total of 3 drops to different rollers inside here, because I did clean that out. I'll stick that over there and then just kind of work that in. That's good. Now we can grease this pinion gear. You want a little bit more than a light coat on this. These reels tend to do a little bit better with a little more than a light coat of grease on them. I'm also going to grease the entire pinion area, especially those grooves up there where the rotor nut is going to go. First goes on one pinion bearing, then we have a keyed inner sleeve for the anti-reverse clutch. Grease this where that second bearing is going to go. You can drop the bearing in place first before you put it on, or you can do it with this going on and putting the bearing afterwards. This one's a little easier to do it this way. And now I'm going to hold this kind of like this and grease on the outside of this as well. Now what we're going to do is stick the stack in. Add some grease to these holes. Then put that bearing cover on. And I'm going to add a little bit of grease from my fingers on top of it. The way it sits is, however you lined up is the way it should go. It's pretty straightforward. I always kind of get this wrong, so that looks right. If it doesn't fit one way, turn it until it fits. That's the bottom line. Alright, so now we're going to put this piece on. I'm going to put a light amount of grease on it, kind of like so. Remember that prong is going to be facing up. we're going to drop it in this general area right here where that prong is in the middle right there, because this is going to be fitting over it kind of like that. So now if you notice there's a hole right here, that prong needs to fit up through it. And like I said, we want to make sure we get it inside there. So I got it inside there. Now we're going to fit this over it just like that. And you're going to pull that all the way in just like so. Essentially what's going to happen is if that anti-reverse clutch goes bad, this is going to back up and that dog is going to come out and hit the inside of that rotor and act as the dog. Alright, so now all we have to do here is put a couple pieces inside here, and then we're going to cover it up with the rotor. So first I'm going to stick one of these bearings inside. Let's get some grease inside here where the bearing's going to go. And I'll do some around here while I'm at it. That's kind of where that crosswind gear sits. Let's drop it in. And now we're going to put this crosswind gear on top after we grease it up. Same deal as for the pinion gear. Do want to make sure you put a decent amount of grease around that post right there. Just drop it on. Pull that post all the way down to the bottom, somewhere in that area. Let's get this collar and stick that on there. Snug it down, but don't over tighten it. You don't want to have an issue trying to get that back out. Alright, so now I'm going to go ahead and stick the rotor on top. I want to make sure that's in like the way it's supposed to be. Grease here a little bit for that bail trip. Then we're going to drop this rotor on top. It's keyed, so you got to rotate it a little bit until you can find that slot for it. There it is. Get our washer and just stick that on there. That's also keyed. And now I'm going to start this like so. I'm going to kind of snug it down. You don't have to lock this up yet, but I'm going to do that. I think around there is probably good, but we're going to find out. I don't want it too tight, but I don't want it too loose either, so. Now we can secure that. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and get our shaft ready because we're going to put that in a second. Grease up this gear. Now if you notice, I'm greasing the entire surface area of all these gears because I like to give them a decent amount of protection. I'm also going to add some grease inside that hole where the handle is going to go. And now I'm going to stick this, kind of get this started to right about there. Drop this gear inside. Get our block, get that greased up because I forgot that part. Add a decent amount of grease inside here. Then just grease the rest of it lightly. Let's get this dropped in there. Before we do that, I'm going to pull this main gear out. Going to kind of angle this like this. Make sure it sits over the post. Just like that. And you can double check it by doing that. If it moves up and down with the post, then it's most likely in the right place. And you can kind of feel it as well. Alright, back in goes the gear. Now I'm going to slide this down. Hold on to that block as you push this through. and I believe either side can go in. If it doesn't go in one way, turn this until the other flat side is showing and try to fit in that way. I'm just securing with the 2 screws that it came with. Before I forget, I'm going to go ahead and add some grease to those holes right there. I like adding grease to these holes as well, even though there's no screws that go inside there. Now we're going to drop our washers on there. Just like that. And like that. Now on this side, we're going to do the same thing we did for the bearing on the other side of the main gear by adding some grease inside here. And it's going to be a light coat. You're not going to put a whole bunch in there. So let me get some of that out. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to work this back down because I want to add some grease to the top of those screws, just to help protect them as well. The one right there, and then these 2 on the block. Now I'm just going to cover it up, kind of feel for how this feels. If it feels good, then we leave it alone. If not, then we kind of play with those shims on the main gear, but this feels pretty darn good. Okay, good. Let's go ahead and lock it up. All right, let's go ahead and add some grease to that hole right there where the bump guard screw is going to go. Light amount of grease around there. I'm going to add some grease to that screw right there because that kind of gets isolated, and if a lot of water gets inside there, it just kind of sits in there and eats away at it. So we'll add some protection to that. Bump guard on. Snug it down. And where is our cap? Get our cap on there. Now we can stick our handle on and try it out. We're not going to test the drags on this. You know they work. We are going to test everything else out. That feels good. Let's see the crank, or sorry, the flip. Flip feels awesome. The anti-reverse feels good. Alright, that's it. Guys, thanks for watching. I appreciate it. I really do. If you found the video useful, please hit that thumbs up button. Also consider subscribing to the channel if you appreciate content like this. And I will see you guys next time. Thanks again for watching.